Good evening once again, and welcome to another Doctor on Call program. We are very happy to be here with you this evening, and of course, with a lot of emphasis on our 50th anniversary of independence. There's a lot happening, and of course, there's a lot promised as we move beyond 50. Yes, and this evening we are looking at our health, 50 and beyond. Our guest this evening, Dr. Francis Martin. He's no stranger to the program. He's been on the program with us on numerous occasions, and I am certain he will be back, as long as we invite him. He's that committed to helping to educate the public on matters related to health. Yes? So this evening, we promise to have quite an interesting discussion. So we welcome all our viewers on GBN Television, 711, our friends on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, and of course you, our loyal listeners on K105 FM. Let us welcome Dr. Martin. Dr. Martin, good evening, Happy New Year, and welcome to your first Doctor on Call for 2024.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. It's always a pleasure to assist and be part of the program. And also, good night and good evening to the listening public, whether at home or in the diaspora or whichever part of the world they are. It might be night or morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed. It's a pleasure as always. 50 years of independence, quite a significant achievement. A very small country, a handful of people, so to speak, 100,000, compared to other Caribbean islands and other countries. But we've achieved quite a lot. And I do believe, as one Calypsonian said, we've come a long way, but we do have a long way to go. And of course, as it relates to health, there's always room for improvement, because I'm sure, Dr. Martin, as a physician, when you have a patient and probably you're at a point where you've done everything you can, you've exhausted everything, and there is a fear that comes over you. There's a fear that comes over you, and you probably wish you can snap your fingers, work a miracle, and send that patient home. But sometimes it just doesn't work that way. So our health care is very important. Our health system is very important. And I also want us to look at a very important aspect, responsibility. But to start, let us look at our health system as is presently. Let's talk a little bit about it, where we are, and what should be done. Are we in a good place, or are we in a place where we need to do better?
Well, like with every aspect of human existence, grading is always relative from one point to the next. And of course, it also depends on what parameters you're looking at, and that will determine where you think you are at this point in time. When it comes to healthcare, there's so many different parameters one can use to assess themselves and see where they are. And for that reason, we as a country have to figure out which parameters are most appropriate or applicable for the Grenadian context, given the history of our healthcare system. We all have to understand that as Commonwealth and as colonies of England, we have actually inherited a healthcare system of the English people or the English government. They themselves have made some changes to the system, but we have been stuck with the old system. And so one has to look at that in the context of the new challenges, the new health challenges, the new governance challenges that Commonwealth people have and people in this part of the country. So it really depends on which parameters you're looking at. One can say we can look at governance and see how has health governance changed over the last 50 years. And while, again, you can tease out all different issues of governance, basically the health governance has not really changed over the last 50 years. We still have a health system now where a Ministry of Health is controlling the health centers and the health system. So that governance hasn't really changed. One can also look at the resources provided for healthcare. And yes, the resources over the health have changed, and I think relatively more resources are being put into health now than it traditionally. Although you have to gauge resources against the GDP, so getting a percentage of how health resources have been spent is something that's interesting to look at. You may also want to look at the services provided and see how we are, where we are, and where we are now. I was an intern. I started my practice of medicine as an intern in 2000, and in 2001 I started practicing medicine. So I can clearly say to you that we have actually changed. We have actually moved from point A to point B when it comes to health services provision. The kind of services we get here now, we never had those services when I was a house officer. And then you also want to look at your health system to see how well your health system is responding to the needs of the population. Are we more proactive or are we reactive to our health our population? So you see, there are so many different parameters by which you gauge and judge your healthcare system that it takes a lot more discussion for us to really figure out where we are. But one thing I must say, globally, from a very overall, not a microscopic way, but a very granular way, indeed, we have moved from point A to point B. We just have to figure out the history of that movement and how can we tweak that movement going forward in the next 50 years.
Right, wonderful. Dr. Martin, you've made some very interesting pronouncements, one of which I would like to come back to not too long from now. But we basically, considering what you have said, I think we have a general idea, because one of the key things is that everyone or every patient would like to know when they come from the doctor, they can go home feeling confident that maybe within a day or two they would start feeling great again and can continue doing all the wonderful things that they love to do, probably without restrictions, without having to change their diet, without having to do a number of things. But of course, we can talk about that in more detail. So understanding that, as we move on from 50 years of independence, the focus as it relates to our healthcare system, where should that focus be going forward?
Again, the focus has to be dependent on the health profile of your country. We need to know, from a health system standpoint, we need to know who is dying from what. We also know who is getting sick from what. We need to know the vital statistics of our countries. And by this, I mean we need to know what our maternal mortality rate is, what our infant mortality rate is. Those are very important data points that a country has to take into consideration to decide how we move and where we move. And until we get that kind of information, that is when we can sit down and figure out where we need to go. So, for example, over the last 10 years, of course, data that I have had, we've put together data that shows who is dying from what. And that brought to the surface that men are dying more than women in certain, in very important areas. And there are reasons why that is happening. So I think it's only when we get that kind of information, we will clearly be able to say where we go and how we go about going forward.
Right, but I mean, after all these years, and of course, and I do take your point, where you mentioned, you started practicing in 2001 thereabout, and there has been some changes. Things have changed, but and let's use that period, 2001. We're now 2024. That's quite a while. Don't we have enough information as it relates to our health profile so we can make some firmer decisions as it relates to where we ought to be going?
Yes, we do have that information. Over a quarter of a decade, while I was an administrative healthcare provider, the very first thing I did when I became a healthcare administrator was to use the epidemiological data available to us. And as some professor said to me way back then in 2011, 2012, it was the first time they saw a healthcare provider take the data on mortality and morbidity and see who is dying from what, and link them to health service provision, link them to health financing and how we divided our health financings to show that where we spend the money is not where we should be spending the money. And this is where the primary healthcare conversation started. Well, not started, but continued and had some more impetus at that time. So yes, the data is available. And as a matter of fact, over the last quarter of a decade again, new data points is now being collected. So I know we have those data. One example is HTLV, the cousin of HIV. Every pregnant woman gets tested for HTLV, but up until 2 or 3 decades ago, HTLV was not being collected as a data point. Now I know that it's being collected. Hepatitis B has been collected to such a point that we're now able to offer hepatitis B vaccination on our national formulary. So you see, the data is available. It's just that we need the consciousness of persons to take that data and making it into a story, which would help to inform our policies going forward.
Right. So as it relates to the consciousness, and I'm using your words, the consciousness of that data, clearly, and I'm not saying that you said that, but somewhere in there, I'm getting a sense that more needs to be done as it relates to, one, collecting that data and working on it. What is preventing that from happening?
I don't think that is being prevented from happening. I think the data is available. I think the problem with many small island developing states is that we have the data, but it's how to put the data into a workable policy going forward. And this is not just a problem for us as Grenada, but a lot of the Commonwealth countries who have practicing the kind of democracy that we have, that have the type of constitution that we have, and the constitution that puts into being how we rule our workers, how we run our governments, and so on. It's all intertwined, and it makes it very difficult for some very significant changes to be made, even if you have the data. And it is simply because of how the government is allowed to run. And again, I don't want to get into that discussion tonight, but it goes right down from the grassroots right up to governance level, and even at a constitutional level as well.
And I understand, Doc, that that might take quite a discussion. But to me, it is very important because somewhere along the line, it is slowing the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is slowing the process.
But something needs to be done. Yeah. Shouldn't our medical fraternity, because you are the experts. You are the ones that understand this thing better than anyone else, any politician, any whoever. So shouldn't our medical fraternity be stepping up more and saying, look, if we need to improve our health care, data is available that can be used to understand and to have a good idea of our health profile. And this is where we need to go. This is what we need to do to fix this thing.
Yes, I have no doubt in my mind that the medical fraternity and the healthcare providers need to provide some guidance as much as possible. But from my own experience, that has not been the problem. Most of us as health physicians, we know what needs to be done. And in many fora, we have spoken to people of what needs to be done. You see, in our health system, there are some unseen forces that makes it very difficult for our health system to move forward. Most doctors understand primary health care. Most doctors understand what people need to do to prevent themselves from getting sick. But doctors cannot stand by themselves. You see, there is many aspects to how a country can run a health system, and it goes from multi-levels. Of course, governance is a huge issue because governance is responsible for the primordial prevention. In other words, setting up an environment to promote health. A doctor cannot set up an environment to promote health. A doctor is trained in providing health care. Who sets up the environment and put the system and policies in place to promote health? That is a government standpoint. So they have a responsibility there. Physicians have the responsibility to provide the care at optimal, best care that we can, be trained to provide the kind of care that the population needs. And that's not a huge problem because many of our doctors are ready to go forward. Then, of course, you have the responsibility of the users of the healthcare system itself. Healthcare users or patients or the citizens have the responsibility to understand that they should not live vicariously, and when they get sick, they just want a magic pill to pay for it. So it's not just the doctor's responsibility to show the direction that we ought to go. It's multi-sectorial, multifaceted, and a huge part of it is governance. Let me tell you something, Godfrey. In 1978, there's something called the Alma Ata Declaration that was signed in Alma Ata, Russia. And that was the time when many of the nations of the world came together. And for the first time, they indicated that for healthcare delivery to be optimal in small island and middle-income developing states is to implement a primary healthcare system. That's 1978. We're in 2024. And the question is, how many countries around the world has been able to implement a primary healthcare system, which what we know is best? And the answer would be very, very disappointing to you, because there are unforeseen forces that fights against people's will to live healthy. It fights against doctors' desire to provide preventative healthcare. And I might dare say, it even fights governments, making it very difficult for them to give the kind of governance that they need to transform the healthcare system.
Very interesting. I want to go back to something you said earlier, that we are in a situation, we live in a country where, for example, our medical centers are basically controlled by the Ministry of Health. Who should be controlling our medical centers, our medical station? And we're talking here primary health care, the first step. What is the appropriate approach to dealing with that?
All right. Well, I am going to answer this question in a very academic way, simply because my specialty is health policy and management, and I do lecture in healthcare systems around the world. So I am going to answer it in a very academic way and see if you can get some semblance of understanding of what I'm saying. Now, we have inherited a healthcare system from the Great Britain or England, so much so that when you and I were boys, the medical station were called the surgery. You remember that time?
Oh yes, the surgery.
It was called the surgery.
Still remember the days when I used to go to the surgery in Hermitage.
Yeah. And even in England, it's still called the surgery.
Right.
We've changed those words to medical stations and health center. Mm-hmm. And coming up from that, and there's a big history to all of this, which I don't want to get into right now, but when the revolution took place in Grenada, fortunately for us, the Grenada was very friendly with Cuba, and the Prime Minister of Grenada, Maurice Bishop, at the time, recognized the Alma Ata Declaration and said that, he believes primary healthcare is the best for a country, and linked up with Cuba, and that was the best time primary healthcare was implemented in Grenada. And so that was the time they put together this whole issue of the primary healthcare team at the health centers and the medical station. And the reason for that was it was believed, and it is still believed, that from a primary healthcare standpoint, the responsibility of primary healthcare in a community does not lie within the bosom of the doctor and the nurse. It has to be an all-of-community approach. So to say that the doctors and the nurses are the ones always responsible for taking care of the medical stations and so on, that is not consistent with the primary healthcare system, and certainly not consistent with where I see the future of healthcare systems in small island developing states are going. So we need to rethink that kind of thing. We also know from studying international healthcare systems around the world that ministries of health or national authorities for health they don't have the capacity, they don't have the resources, nor the time to micromanage healthcare at the community level. Ministries of Health's responsibilities are for policy guidelines, policy developments, guidelines, monitoring and evaluation, making sure that the country's health statistics remain at a responsible level. All the health system studies around the world have indicated that for optimum functions and managerial functions at health facilities, the facilities themselves must have some autonomy in being able to make changes within the healthcare system. You know, there was a time in Grenada where to change a light bulb in a health center in St. Patrick's required a long set of paperwork, eventually to be authorized by a Ministry of Health. Mm-hmm. Now, you want to tell me how could you go forward with that kind of situation? And that's what I'm talking about. The responsibility of running the day-to-day services within a primary healthcare system in small island developing states has to lie within a district or a group of facilities that can manage themselves on a daily basis and allow the ministries of health of those small islands to do the job that they ought to do, which is monitoring and evaluation, policy development, setting guidelines, and such and such.
Very interesting, and definitely I have gotten the gist of where you're going with it. Just one additional question on that: the community approach to primary healthcare, and I like the sound of that. I love the sound of that because it also, the question of responsibility comes into play here. I want you to talk a little bit more about that, the community approach, just aside from the healthcare providers.
Yes, the community approach. And usually I would give an example in most of my public lectures, or even when I lecture at the university, I would give those examples. If a physician goes to a medical station let's say he goes to a medical station in Grand Anse, or maybe Grand Anse is not the best approach. Maybe I will say he goes to a medical station in Clogier. And on that particular day, the physician recognized that there were 3 children that came into the health facility, and it looked as though those children have a particular diagnosis. Let's say a diagnosis where their heart rate was very slow, they were salivating, they were listless, they look like, the physician obviously knows what the diagnosis is, and the physician might quickly recognize organophosphate poisoning, and he may be able to admit to the hospital for the antidote or even administer the antidote there. But that story should not end there. That physician has to recognize that, yes, I have a responsibility to treat these patients, but because of the wealth of knowledge that I know, and because I know I'm living in a agricultural community, he has to suspect that something else might be going on. And that's where we go into the realm of epidemiology or surveillance, where you recognize that 3 children from a close neighborhood are coming down with the same disease. It means that problem doesn't lie just with that child or with these persons. You have to now do the surveillance. You have to get your environmental health department and your surveillance department to go ahead and see what's going on, because the problem may just be in the community. And that's an example of why I'm saying the community involvement is important for us to really to provide the kind of responsive care that we need for small island developing states.
Very good indeed. So let's move on. And I had asked earlier about the focus and as we move forward. And last evening in the Prime Minister's address, he focused on some key pillars, one of them being health. And he did put out an emphasis on the responsibility of us as a people. And he made mention of eating healthy, exercising, in terms of our social life, then who we communicate with, how we live, all of these things. He made a reference to that, and I think it was quite important. And of course, in some of the things you said tonight, you've also spoke along those lines. So clearly it is important that the role that we have to play as a people is also very significant. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, the Prime Minister said the most important thing, that people have a responsibility. And through the years, that's a statement that has been repeated and repeated and repeated by all and sundry, that people have a responsibility. And everything is correct with that statement. People have a huge responsibility. So the question that we now need to ask ourselves is, for the last 50 years, we've been saying people need to have their responsibility. And in the last decade, we've been saying even more and more that people need to have the responsibility. And the Prime Minister laid it out last night, and that's absolutely correct. So the question to my mind, Godfrey, is, if over the last 50 years, we've always been saying that people should take their responsibility, and even now people are still not taking their responsibility, doesn't it mean that we should ask another question?
Yes. Yes.
And the other question is, why are people not taking the responsibility? It is all well and good to say that people must take responsibility, but we need to understand why. Because there is something called the social determinants of health, Godfrey. There is things that is called the social determinants of health. In other words, people might be given a social situation where they're stuck. As a matter of fact, I used to be saying, it's like giving someone a hot bowl of soup, which is a good thing, but you don't give them a spoon to eat the soup. How are they going to eat the soup? So to say that people need to take responsibility is cutting it short. We need to ask ourselves why people are not taking responsibility. And when you ask that question, you realize that you've now opened up a Pandora's box, because that responsibility doesn't just lie with people's choices. Some people have choices in taking responsibility, but many people do not have a choice in what they do. So it speaks to educational levels. It speaks to socioeconomic status and background. It speaks to a lot of social ills that are there. And there's one other thing, Godfrey, that people don't speak much about. The way we feed our children, we feed them in a way that causes them to be addicted to the horrible foods of this world. And as a matter of fact, even you and I are probably addicted to these foods anyway because of our reliance on processed foods. So if we have a nation where people have been consuming processed foods for the last 10 years or the last 20 years, you are wasting your voice by telling them make good choices now. You are, because they are already addicted. So going forward, in the next 50 years, if you want to stop that addiction, you have to start that treatment now, because a lot of us are addicted simply because we were eating processed foods. And this processed food, I do a public lecture on how we choose our foods. And I like to do that lecture because when I start the lecture, I would always ask people, do you think you have choice over what you eat? And they always say, of course, yes, I could choose what I want to eat. The Prime Minister says we must take responsibility, and I have that responsibility. But halfway into the lecture, when I ask them the question again, all of them would say, my God, I thought I could have choose what I was eating. But you realize they cannot choose what they're eating because the choices of food was already decided for them because of what they're saying. So when people use that statement, that others must take responsibility for what they eat and how and on their health, I say don't stop there. Go further and speak to them as to why they're making that bad decision, because only then they will understand how they need to change in order to make healthier food choices.
So I to understand here that there must be some collaboration with various sectors in helping to address that problem.
I've always been said it requires an all-of-society approach. An all-of-society approach. It is not just the patients to make the decision. It's the parents to understand that they should not feed carbonated beverages to their children. It is our whole national consciousness that when we have celebrations, we must concentrate on eating healthier foods. It's our governance responsibility and our healthcare responsibility for educating people as much as possible and demonstrating good food choices to people as we go forward, and then understanding where people are coming from. If we don't understand the struggles that people are going through, we will never be able to understand why they make the decisions that they make. So yes, it's an all of society approach.
Right. Doc, let's take a short break. When we come back, I have 2 additional questions for you. Hopefully, there may be 1 or 2 more, but 2 main ones when we come back. And of course, a little later, we'll engage our listeners. So stay with us, folks. We'll be back with you in just a moment.
Blast Gaming is where dreams come true and jackpots are won. Dive into a world of delightful experiences and daring action. From the moment you step through the doors, have the time of your life, feel the energy, soak in the excitement, and let the good times roll. Blast is more than just a place to play. It's where friends socialize, cocktails flow, and a safe space for those who dream big and dare to have fun while doing it. Blast Gaming. Know your limit, play within it. You must be 18 and over.
Agritech Limited Grenada is your one-stop shop for all your farming needs. We provide seeds and seedlings, pesticides, fertilizers, irrigation and water management systems, veterinary products, and a wide range of agricultural products and implements. Our staff is knowledgeable and ready to serve you. Call us on 435-9677 or 440-4460 or visit us in Happy Hill, St. George. We are open Monday to Saturday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and on Sundays, 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. Agritech Limited Grenada. Come grow with us.
The Planning and Development Authority of Grenada, PDA, is enforcing regulations to curb illegal, disorderly, and unauthorized development in several locations throughout the state of Grenada. The authority is concerned that structures mainly associated with vending are negatively impacting the environment, has undesirable public health and sanitation consequences, present obstructions to vehicle and pedestrian traffic, can become projectiles during adverse weather conditions, and generally affect the aesthetics of the nation. The PDA will work along with stakeholder ministries and institutions to effect the demolition, removal, and disposal of structures which fall in the category of illegal and disorderly development, commencing January 2024. In this regard, persons who vend in or occupy such illegal structures are advised to secure their personal belongings and have the structures removed ahead of the planned PDA demolition operations. These actions of the PDA have become necessary to safeguard and protect public health and the environment, ensure the safety and well-being of all citizens and visitors, discourage any future disorderly construction, and encourage compliance to regulations pertaining to physical development in the state of Grenada. This is a message from the Planning and Development Authority of Grenada.
I'm a VIP. I'm a VIP.
I am a VIP. I am vaccinated. I am immunized. I am protected. Our children and nation depend on vaccination for immunization. Childhood vaccination is national priority. It is their protection from disease and sicknesses. Let's all be VIPs and safeguard our beautiful Grenada. I am DJ Blackstorm and I am a VIP health champion. Be a VIP like me.
Let's all be VIP champions.
A message from the Ministry of Health, Wellness and Religious Affairs. Be a VIP Childhood Vaccination and Immunization Campaign in collaboration with UNICEF and the Pan American Health Organization.
Have you heard about the new Softweave bathroom tissue with total hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers layers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Soft Weave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue, available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Soft Weave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Doctor in Call, our guest, Dr. Francis Martin, and we're looking at our health, 50 and beyond. Dr. Martin, we've had some, very interesting comments earlier. I want to move on now to medicine. Of course, we do know that the science and the scientists, they continue to work to improve on medicines. Ever so often we hear of new medications, we hear of, updated stuff and so on and so forth. How up to date are we here as it relates to modern and improved medicines?
Well, again, our medicines here that we use on the island, again, it is relative when it comes to asking about the currency of the medicines that we use. Now, by and large, in the OECS, because of the lack of economies of scale by the smaller islands, there is a pooled procurement service that the OECS come together so that they can buy medicines in bulk. So there is that limitation there, because from the health financing standpoint, you want to buy medicines that are as effective as it can be at the best cost for us here. And in fact, that has been viewed as a very good, successful public health good that the OECS has managed to roll out. And in fact, some other countries have looked at what the OECS have done and have jealous that and wanted to be part of it, because it does help us to get the best medicine for the best price. Of course, the plethora of medicines that are out there is different across the world. And we just have to face it. There is a business component to pharmacy and pharmacology and pharmaceutical industry. And so the first world countries are always going to have the first liners that are the cutting edge technologies. And that we have to accept as a fact. And secondly, we are limited in the Caribbean simply because of, from a social standpoint, and maybe not just from a social standpoint, but from an ethical standpoint, we as people in the Caribbean, and Black people, I must say, are very reluctant to take part in studies when it relates to medicines and so on. So a lot of the times we are given medicines that we as a population was not involved in the development, because we didn't place ourselves to do the studies. And as I like to say sometimes, why people study the thing to make sure it's good for them, and then we get it afterwards. So there is this there is this little dynamic there that doesn't always ring true, but that has happened in the past. But what I want to focus on is something that is called essential medicines. Essential medicines are the term that is used to determine, to describe the major medicines that are absolutely central for the management of chronic disease in the Eastern Caribbean and by and large the Latin American countries as well. These essential medicines are pretty standard, and we do have a pretty good supply of those. In fact, when we approached the United Nations in 2012, as a Caribbean region, when we realized that chronic disease was actually killing 70% of our people, one of the things we asked the United Nations is to remove the patenting of essential drugs, so that pharmaceutical companies and Caribbean companies can produce the same drug at a cheaper rate for us in the Caribbean. And to us, that was an important thing for us as a Caribbean people. Unfortunately, the United Nations did not grant those. So we still now have to be paying for those medicines through our teeth, so to speak. But they're essential medicines for us, and once we get them, they're okay. I must say also that although within the public sector in the Eastern Caribbean, we are using essential medicines, the better medicines that are out there are also available. Unfortunately, it's only available in the private sector. And in some unique cases, you might get it in the public sector for something very specific. So as far as our medications are concerned, I am not too worried about it because I think by and large in the Eastern Caribbean, we are getting decent medicines. However, after COVID, something has changed. Now, COVID changed the supply chain management challenges that many countries have. And so countries now have to source medicines from very questionable locations. In fact, I saw a piece on CNN once, or was it BBC or CNN? One of them, that actually showed counterfeit drugs being produced in Central America. And it went further to show that these drugs found their way into hospitals, even into hospitals. So we do have that kind of a challenge where we cannot authenticate, and we here down in the lower part of the Caribbean don't have any means of testing to see what we get, if that is what we get. And so that's that challenge as well that we have to manage. So I would say while by and large I am satisfied with the medicines that we get, I think we still have to have good surveillance to make sure that we're getting what we say we're getting, and we're hoping that our Caribbean pharmacology organizations, whatever they are called, is able to work towards getting the kind of facilities we need to ensure that we're getting the drugs that we say that we're told we're getting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. But we continue to grapple in well, and we're talking Grenada here, with treatment for things like cancer, of course. People here, for example, who require, I think it's radiotherapy. You may have to travel outside of Grenada for that. It's not available here. And chemotherapy and things like that. I'm not sure, you can correct me here on that. But I know there are some issues as it relates to some sort of conditions where it's not available here and we have to travel outside. Another one is the issue of dialysis, which we know is extremely costly, and these are things that we really have trouble with. And I'm mentioning that along the lines of our health 50 and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to start with the cancer issue. Cancers are the number one cause of death in our neck of the woods, whereas chronic disease is the number one cause of death globally. I mean, cancer death is really a huge cause of death for us here as well. But the cancer rate, the cancer incidence and prevalence in the Caribbean is at an unacceptable level. And it's not just now. It has been an unacceptable level for some decades now. So much so that in Antigua, a group of doctors came together and put together the Cancer Center in Antigua on the premise that cancer treatment is so expensive that the average Caribbean person wouldn't be able to afford it. So the premise was, we're putting the center together in Antigua, and we need all the islands to come on board with us. And if a patient needs that service through the Ministry of Health, we could give them at X price, whatever it is. Well, fast forward a few decades, the center is now closed down because, again, the cost is prohibitive. And many of the islands who initially signed up and wanted to be part of it, it just wasn't sustainable. And so the issue of cancer treatment going to continue to plague us, because even now we're trying to do the best that we can. And my heart goes out to our current Ministry of Health and our CMO and so on, because I know they really have a difficult job with this issue. And I don't see it getting any different anytime soon. So we need to invest. Well, I can't say, you could probably say invest in how do we curb the rate of cancers and to ensure that we have available treatment. Dialysis is a very similar thing. I mean, many years ago, not many of my colleagues was really happy with me saying those, but I mean, I kept saying that if we're hoping to curb renal failure by having dialysis units, you are already lost the battle, because the data has already shown that if you're trying to keep up with tertiary treatment, your health system will crash. You cannot keep up with tertiary health systems, and dialysis is one of those. It is more important to spend X amount of dollars on your diabetic patients to prevent them from getting into dialysis rather than trying to dialyze them. Now, there is a place for dialysis in health systems because there is an entity called acute renal failure. They're going to need dialysis because it is reversible. And in some instances, even if you have renal damage, it is to a large extent reversible. But chronic renal failure or end-stage renal failure is basically no turning back. And in fact, there has been some studies some years ago. I'm not current with the data now, but because I've been out of public health for a while now, but there are some current data that says in the Caribbean, even if someone is end-stage renal failure, even if they're on dialysis, the survival rate is still not very much more than 10 years. So this is a reality that we have to ask ourselves going forward as small island developing states post 50 years of independence. Do we want to back up the tree of treatment, or do we want to come back down that tree and says, boy, I think I've been climbing the wrong tree. Let's look at the ocean, the forest again, and choose another tree.
You know, very interesting. And as it relates to dialysis, I'm what I'm getting here, and to put it in local and blunt terms, you can go on and take dialysis as much as you want, but the point is going to come.
Yes,
it won't prevent anything from happening. And I think it is something that I think this is so very important. Important in the sense that it shows you that urgent and dire need to prevent ourselves from getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, some of my colleagues are not going to be happy with my perception of what I'm going to say next. I find it very strange that health systems in developing countries, what they do, they spend a lot of money on providing specialist training for the healthcare providers. So, for example, healthcare systems will spend a lot of time training nephrologists, right? Or persons specialized in kidneys, or people specialize in cardiology, specialize in the heart. And then these persons go back to their countries and they sit in the hospital and wait for people with renal failure to come to them. Now, no, I don't know if I'm the only one seeing this thing that way. But to my mind...
that's a very interesting point of view, and it does make sense. I mean, it's important to give, serious consideration to that.
Yes, I'm very serious. I mean, like I say, I've studied health systems in developing countries across the world, and I can see trends, but there are suggestions of what could be done about it. So it's not like it's a dark hole. There are ways to get about it. But my opinion is that if you're going to train highly specialized people, part of that training has to do with how do we prevent this from happening in the first place, and use that resources at your upstream determinants of health. In public health, there's a term called upstream determinants of health. That means you go upstream to change the course of where that river is running to prevent it from flooding downstream. And that's a widely accepted public health concept that I think many countries are not looking at. But for us, we have to look at it because, as I say, if we're going to focus on treatments of tertiary complications of diseases, it is going to crash your health system.
Very, 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 very interesting. Dr. Martin, the other question I wanted to ask you before we sort of open up, the whole issue of, and that's, of course, 50 and beyond, moving ahead, technology and healthcare. What place does technology have, as we try to improve on our health systems?
Well, going forward, technology is the center. Technology is there's no way around it.
Mm-hmm. That's where it's at.
Yes, that's it. There's no, if any conversation is going to happen on healthcare, that conversation has to start with technology. Because technology can help in many deficiencies that you have. Let me just put it in a very simple way. There is a technology now where a doctor can take his camera, go to a village way up wherever. He can take a picture of the retina of someone, and there are apps where that image can be sent back to an ophthalmologist anywhere in the world, and a diagnosis could be made and management started. Now, we are a small island, so we may not need that here. No, but I'm giving it to you as an example of where and what we have to do. Look at this. I am now out of the island, and I have a lot of patients. Someone is sitting in for me. On a daily basis, I have the ability to assist and collaborate with this physician in real time, live, because I have the historical context of the patient. She doesn't have the historical context. So together we can manage the patient very well. So no matter which part of the world I am, this can be managed. So it has to be part of what we do going forward. And in training our physicians and in training our healthcare providers, they have to also be trained in technology, because without that, we're going to see ourselves lagging behind the rest of the world as we move forward.
We've also heard the term e-medicine.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's probably an umbrella word that speaks to a lot of things, and we call it telemedicine to a certain extent, because you can actually take care of people. We're a small country, and even now I do telemedicines. Something as simple as someone has a problem on their skin, for example. They don't need to come sit in the doctor's office to look at something on the skin. You can do a video chat, and you can see what's happening with the video chat. And maybe sometimes not even just skin. Sometimes just looking at the patient, someone is coughing, you can look at certain things, and you can see that that person is unwell. You may ask the people at home to do some basic examination. Most people have blood pressure and blood sugar machines in their house. You can ask them to check those vitals for you. And you can make a diagnosis right there. You can write a prescription and send it to the pharmacy. So, and in Grenada now, there are pharmacies who actually delivering medicines to the person's house. And so within 10 minutes, you go from diagnosing someone to the medicine arriving at your home. And that is possible. So e-medicine is here to stay. We even now have technologies where people stay across the world and do operations in other parts of the world, because we are able to do that kind of thing. And I have not seen it going backward. That's the future of medicine. I've said to some of my colleagues and even my patients, this whole idea of going and sit down in the doctor's waiting room, that's not going to be the future. Those who are in the waiting room are people who actually need to see the doctor. You have a lacerations, you need to get this sutured, you need something put in. But a lot of this practice of medicine will be done remotely, as I see it going forward.
Just to switch for a second, look at in the legal fraternity. No longer does people have to go and sit in a court to answer their charge. I recall some months ago I got a traffic ticket, and I was able to go up on the Zoom and tell the magistrate, yes, I'm guilty, I wasn't wearing my seatbelt. And right. We were just talking here about the technology and what can happen, so 50 and beyond, there's quite a lot that can be considered. There's a lot to focus on, and I think if we understand and we have the data to understand our health profile, I think we're on the right path, and to get people to do what needs to be done. The community approach, for example, the primary health care, I think we could be in a good place. And I think maybe the emphasis and a lot of work may have to go into the issue of getting medicine, because of the high cost involved. So
yes, absolutely. I mean, the e-medicine has to be part of it, but I'm going to be more specific now and more local now. There are some infrastructural issues that I think we would have to face, infrastructural and governance issues that I think we'll have to face. Just to put some historical context to what I'm going to say, there was a project in Grenada in the past called Project Hope.
Yes.
That project was implemented because transportation was a huge problem in Grenada at the time. The objective of the project was to ensure that each citizen of the country is within a 3-mile radius of a health facility, so that you can actually walk there if you need to, because transportation was an issue. While at that time it made sense, it gave birth to about 30-something health facilities in the country. So we have almost 30, or maybe it might be less than that now on the island. Now fast forward into 2024. Is transportation a problem as it was back then? But we still have this close to 30 health facilities that now we are forced to operate. And what's worse, these facilities sets up people's expectation. Because you have a health facility in your community expectation is that something will happen in that healthcare facility. The reality of the situation on the ground is that we cannot afford to adequately maintain all those 30 health facilities. And the question is, do we actually need all those 30? Well, the answer is no, you don't. Because transportation is not as problematic as it used to be. People could get from point A to point B. I think the infrastructural issue needs to be addressed. And because of the current situation, it decreases people's confidence in the health facility. Because just imagine you have a health facility in your community and you could only receive care from a doctor once a week. Now, does that make any sense? If you got sick the day after the doctor attended, you now have to wait until a week later for the doctor to come. It is a conversation that we have to have. It's not a very happy conversation, especially in the political circles, because it does have some governance issues there. But to my mind, the best way to going forward, given our current resources, especially human resources, is to grade up or step up health facilities and let every parish have a reliable health facility. And the only how to have each parish have a reliable health facilities is to pool your resources of that community or that parish into that facility, so people know that they can rely on that facilities for services. It's a huge conversation that have started many years ago. I know tonight is now going to be solving it, but I hold true to that concept that I believe within the local context, this is one of the things we can do to help support the post-50 change that is expected in health systems in our country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. Folks, our telephone line is now open. You can give us a call. The number is 435-2041 if you have any questions you would like to ask Dr. Martin. We're discussing our health 50 and beyond, as it relates to the focus, medicine, community responsibility. All of these things, they do play an important role. So we'd like to hear from you. The number again, 435-2041. You have any questions, you can definitely give us a call, and Dr. Martin would be definitely more than happy to share what information that you're looking for. Dr. Martin, in the meantime, I want you to just go back a bit and let's sort of summarize this in terms of that focus, 50 and beyond. some of the main things. Let's summarize it. Maybe from the community level, patient level, doctors level, administrative level.
Right. Yeah. It has to be at all of those levels. The first level is governance. The governance structure of the healthcare system must change. Small island developing states must separate the role of the national health authorities, separate that from their day-to-day technical running of health facilities. That has to happen. And from governance, then human resource also has to change. The human resource has to reflect the change that has happened in the world over the years and what is expected going forward. And then you also have to work at a user's standpoint. In other words, our users need to be educated and understand more what is required of them going forward. So, those to my mind are the three major areas that has to be looked at. And if some tangible change cannot happen there, then I will see it very difficult in our post-50 experience.
Folks, again, the number 435, our telephone was going a while ago, 435-2041. You can definitely give us a call and, whatever questions or comments you have, we would take them now. The number again, 435-2041. So you can give us a call and, of course, we'll definitely engage you. Dr. Martin, I just want to add, and I just want to go back a bit on the Prime Minister's address last night and the area when he spoke of health and the importance he placed on the role of our people in terms of ensuring that they take up that responsibility. Because one of the things that can happen, and I'm sure it does happen, is that when people do not do what they're supposed to do, in a way it puts a lot of pressure on a health system that is not what it ought to be. And so it complicates things a little bit. Do you agree?
Yes, I completely agree. There is a huge responsibility that people have to play, and not just in what they do, not just in what they eat, because there's a lot of information out there in what they eat, but the importance they place on health. In some instances, people put health on a back burner, for example. A child may have a flu or a cold for 2-3 days, and the parents find it easier to go to town and do something else. And by the time you see the child, there is a clear-cut pneumonia that is going on. That needs to be looked at in terms of taking that responsibility. The household needs to take a responsibility as well. Many times when I worked at the ER during festive seasons, a lot of the elderly folk come into hospital because they don't get the kind of nutrition that they need, and the family members are not as supportive as they need. So there is that responsibility there. Your fathers need to step up and take the responsibility to help the mothers in the house to take care of those children, because there's a lot of things that goes on there. But what our citizens need to understand, that even if the health system makes the changes that it needs to make, and even if the health providers make the change, they still have that gap that only them and them alone can change.
Right. Let's go to the telephone. We have a caller on the line. Okay, well, we seem to have lost the caller. The number again, 435-2041. Let's go back to our telephone. Doctor and call, good evening.
Hello, good night.
Yes, good evening, caller.
Happy Independence to you all.
Thank you very much, and we wish you the same.
I was listening to your program, and there is certain things that I would like to, the questions I would like to ask.
Sure.
Is there what... All right, let me first say, sometimes that you go to a doctor and you're trying to explain to the doctor how you feel, and while you're speaking to the doctor to tell the doctor how you feel, he is writing the prescription, but he doesn't really listen to hear what is the problem. The problem arises from because you come to him to get a result, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if you get a good smile, you know, how you do today, you know, it enriches your feelings. So even so that you have a pain, the pain apparently it wouldn't go, but it will die because the communication between the doctor and the patient, it have a medicine that transfers to your body, to the doctor and to the patient. Another thing is that what causes post circulation?
Okay. Thank you, caller. Thank you very much indeed.
And before you go, Doc, is there a place in Grenada that a person could go if they're suffering from post circulation? Because what happened, why I asked that question is, I know there is a lady that has a problem, and she goes to the doctor. The doctor just gives medication, and that is all. They give medication upon medication, and she is still there having the pain in her legs and so on. And, you know, it's an uncomfortable situation, you know. So if there is a place in Grenada, or if there's a place or someone that you could refer to, then it makes life easier, and it makes you get healthier by doing certain things that you're supposed to do, and by eating things that you're supposed to eat, and what you're not supposed to eat, you wouldn't eat it because you don't want the problem to escalate.
Okay, thank you very much, caller. Thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Doc, were you able to...
Yeah, well, I have heard that complaint on many, many occasions, the very first one that she has.
Right. Uh-huh.
I heard it on many, many occasions, and I don't want to make an excuse for it. What I can say, however, is that doctors are very, very highly trained people. And sometimes, Godfrey, by the time you make this second statement, the doctor already knows what's going on with you because of the level of training. Mm-hmm. And so the doctor can actually start writing that prescription there. But what that lady is speaking to is the soft skills. Mm-hmm. How the doctor relate that thing and how he does. So there, and doctors are human too. There is a human element of a doctor. Doctor is not a robot. And so us as doctors, we always have to be mindful of the human element of things. There are many, many times by the time the person opens their mouth, I know what's wrong. But I don't write the prescription immediately.
Yes, right.
You take your time. So I understand what she's going through. And I hope that more and more doctors are going to apply those soft skills to help the patient to understand that they don't feel neglected.
Right.
As far as the post circulation is concerned, she needs to understand one thing. In the Grenadian context, we do not have a cure for post circulation. We don't have a vascular surgeon in this country. All right. But understanding the risk of post circulation and understanding what you need, her specific risk of post circulation, and avoid those risks, she and her doctor can work out what her risks are. I wouldn't know what her risks are because I haven't seen her for myself. Mm-hmm. But once you work out those risks, the issue is how do you prevent it by learning to avoid the circumstances.
Right. Wonderful indeed. Yes. So, caller, I hope that helped you. Let's go back to the telephone. We have another caller on the line. Doctor and call, good evening.
Dr. and call, good night. Godfrey and Dr. Martin.
Yes, good evening, caller. Mm-hmm.
Happy Independence one time.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
No, Doc, there's a problem with most people's circulation in any case, you know. I do yoga for years in any case. Which is best way to sleep, Doc? On your side, your belly, or your back? I'd like to know the question completely. On your side, your belly, or your back? But I learned in yoga, for years gone by, the best way to sleep is on your back. With your body straight. Your blood does not put your body for the whole night up and down. Your blood travel you up and down in the night. So if you bend your knee and sleep on your chest, with your knee up on your chest and sleep, or your hand under your head, one side go down and one side go alive. So I would like to so most people who sleep on the side. I don't study physics, but I do yoga for years and I study in books and I read. the best way to sleep on your back. With the body straight, your hands straight, the foot straight. Anytime you sleep on the side, that side will be a dead side. The pressure put on the shoulder, the vein, blood can go into the vein at the shoulder, getting stagnant some way. You bend your hand and put your hand on the head and sleep at night time. One hand go up, life in the back, and the front hand go dead. So just stretch it out and knock it with a hammer for you to get back life in it, doc.
Okay, thank you, caller.
Give me some complaint about that, doc. We best is for sleeping.
Thank you. Yes, okay. Doc?
He sounded very, very muffled.
Right, he was he was asking what's the best way to sleep, and he says he believes it's on your back with your hands and legs stretched out. So he was basically asking your opinion on this.
Yes, I mean, humans are the only animals that sleep on our back and exposes our belly to the sky. Most of the animals sleep and protect their belly, which is the softest area. And so the most comfortable position is on your back. And if you choose to sleep on your side, then to keep your spine straight, that little bend, that little curved area between your ears and your shoulder, your pillow has to fit in there nicely to make sure your spine is straight. But this is not a question that is an answer that is set in stone. People are different. They have different spinal issues. You need to find a comfortable place to sleep. And even when you are asleep, we change position while we are asleep anyway. So to tell persons there is one specific way to sleep, I don't know if there's a lot of sense to this, because you're going to change that position unconsciously when you're sleeping anyway.
That's the point. You're not even aware.
Yeah, so it's a matter of finding that comfortable spot for you. And if you find you're getting numbness on one end, change that location and try to get as uniform a few locations that will help you to feel better when you get up in the morning.
Okay, wonderful. 435-2041. Let's go back to our telephone. Doctor and call, good evening.
The doctor call back in any case, you know. No, doc, if you sleep on your back and you put your hand behind your head and sleep, will you get the full life of your blood running through your body at a time from your hand? If you put your hand behind your head and sleep on your back, that one part of your hand go dead, completely die.
If you could do this and you could wake up just like that in the morning, then that's just good for you, and that's fine.
Yeah, you pick up one. Because when you bend the elbow, doc, the vein can flow no blood from there where you bend. So one side have blood on top and the other side dead, so your blood can go to the belly. But I read books about them kind of thing, doc. Your blood runs your body for the whole day and night, miles up and miles up and miles up and down in your body. And if you bend any part of the joints and sleep, you will get post circulation. Sleep on the side, you will bring your body heavy weight on one side, the vein will get pressure.
Caller, let me just ask you this quickly.
Yeah, we're chatting, I mean, because people looking for knowledge.
Let me just ask you this quickly. But weren't your joints designed in such a way so that they can bend depending on where they are?
Godfrey, if you bend your knee and slip, Godfrey, blood can pass you in the young way, bend already on the bend, Godfrey.
Okay.
If you bend your elbow and slip one side, your elbow can, the blood can go to your vein when you bend.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's straight. Yeah. Godfrey, I will bend both.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. All right. All right. Doc, do you want to still comment on this? Or
it was very difficult to hear everything.
Well, he's contending that if you bend your elbow, then it would stop the flow of blood.
Oh, okay. That does not happen in everybody.
Well, let's go back. We have another call on the line. Let's go to the telephone. Doctor and call, good evening. Hello.
Hello, good night.
Yes, good evening, caller. Mm-hmm.
Good evening. I just want to say thanks to the pharmacy next side under Atlantic Health.
Okay, thank you. All right, 435-2041. We have time probably for 2 quick questions before we wrap for this evening. So the number again, 435-2041. Let's go to the telephone and see who's with us. Doctor and call, good evening.
Good evening, Doc. Good evening.
Good evening, caller.
Godfrey. I just want to ask a question here, please.
Sure.
Doc, tell me something. How easy it is if one goes to the doctor, right, and they have, let's say, a dangerous illness, let's say like heart disease or cancer or something. How easy it is, for the doctor to really tell them as it is, or it does be something sort of difficult for the doctor to tell them. Just how easy that is for the doctor to really tell them as it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, caller. Doc, did you get that?
No, I didn't.
Right. So he's asking if a patient goes to a doctor and it is discovered that they have, let's say, a very serious illness, how easy it is for the doctor to tell the patient.
Well, you remember earlier I spoke about the soft skills?
Yes, you did.
Yeah. It is not a very easy thing to do. In fact, when I was in medical school, we actually had a course called Breaking Bad News. Mm-hmm. So doctors are trained in how to speak to people with breaking bad news. What I discourage doctors from not speaking the truth. There was a time in our history when doctors used to not say all for fear of whatever it is.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It's very dangerous to do it now because of the advent of the internet. Patients know a lot of stuff. So the more upfront you can be and clear to patients, they find it better rewarding at the end. But it's not what you say, but it's how you say it that makes the difference. Soft skills cannot be taught in a medical school. Soft skills is something you develop by interacting with your people, knowing who they are, knowing how they feel, understanding some innuendos in our societies, and that's what helps you with your soft skills.
Right. Let's take one final call before we wrap. Doctor and call, good evening. Okay, so we lost that call. You mentioned, Doc, the whole issue of the internet with information. Patients can actually go on, do their stuff, and come and tell you, Doc, this is what is wrong with me,
Yes. In fact, I like when they do that, because when they do that, it makes my consultation much, much shorter. Mm-hmm. So I like when they come with questions. I also like when people go to do their blood test, that they open the results and read it for themselves and come with questions in your mind when you see what you read. Again, it makes my job much, much easier. Mm-hmm. And in other instances, after I make a diagnosis, I write it down on a piece of paper and I give it to them and I say, go home and read and educate yourself on this issue. The more information people get, it's the better decisions they make on their diseases, and makes your job as a physician much easier. At least my job much easier.
All right. Yes, indeed. Well, Doc, we've out of time for this evening, so I will allow you, if you have anything that you felt you needed to put out there and we did not touch it, you can do so and make your whatever closing comments you would like to.
Well, what I'd like to say is that this topic tonight, post 50, is a very current issue. And it's quite important, but it is not something that is very easy to solve because of the amount of prongs and cogs that need to come in place for this to happen. And so it cannot be solved some countries take 10 to 20 years to turn the health systems around. Mm-hmm. And so we should not aim to change it in 5 years. But what I think has to happen is a very meaningful conversation must start now to help to change the health system in 10 to 20 years. Because if it doesn't start now, or what has started before, if we don't tangibly continue the conversation, in the next 50 years, somebody else will be having this same program that we're having now. Mm-hmm. Going forward, post 2050, 50 years, traditionally, we have inherited a socialized healthcare system from England where the government basically is responsible for the healthcare of the nation. And there are some private entities within the health system. But by and large in Grenada, health is viewed as a human right. So anybody can go into any health center and get care. And then we do have some private entity that offers care as well. Mm-hmm. All of the health systems research around the world and the projections around the world is that for small island developing states and even middle income countries, a public healthcare system alone is not going to make it. So the current construct is not going to be sustainable. A private healthcare system alone is also not going to be feasible for a country going forward. The conversation in public health now is, how do you have a mixture of both? And there are models that can be looked at that can show how a public and private entity can come together to provide healthcare for an entire nation. So the public-private partnership going forward is what I see as feasible for a healthcare system like ours to make it going forward. There are some aspects of the healthcare system that a private entity could run, and then there are some aspects that the public entity can run. Concurrent with this, that must happen. There is no way around it. Concurrent with this is the electronic medical records. That has to happen in some form or feature, and healthcare financing must come together with it as well. And the most preferred healthcare financing that we see that has worked in many countries is pooled health financing vis-a-vis either a national health insurance or some form of entity that ensures that there would not be financial crisis when someone gets sick. So those are the things that have been showing promise that a future healthcare system can work with. A public-private partnership, mixed healthcare system, electronic medical records, and health financing reforms. I do hope that our next 50 years is going to be showered with drizzled with things as these, so that we can actually see a change in our healthcare system as we move forward.
Yes, indeed. I just wanted to just highlight one thing that you spoke about, Doc, which I think is, very, very important. The issue of the health profile, understanding what is happening in our communities. And you made mention of something with the babies, and I'm saying here, what if you realize a number of people are in let's say, for example, a medical station in a community, and 60% of them, when they come, they're diabetic. Are we going to go into that community and maybe have some collaboration, probably with the Ministry of Agriculture or with something, to understand their diet? What are they eating? What are they drinking? And how can that collaboration with health help to address that? So that, and I think this is so very important. So all of these things that you mentioned, I think it's, very, very, very important, critical that we look at these things as we move past 50 years. Indeed.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The health profile of the communities provide the best opportunity and the best data to inform whatever management or policy decision is made for that particular community. And so we cannot get by without doing the health community profile. And it's not difficult to do because some of it has already been done. As a matter of fact, the national data collection can also give us a very, very good insight as to what the health profile of the country is like. So that is what can be used to determine how we shape our healthcare system post 50 years independence.
And Dr. Martin, I thank you so very much for accepting the invitation. Even while out, you've found the time to be on the program with us to share information. Very, very important information. I thank you very much, and I am looking forward to having you back pretty soon to continue our discussions and to continue to, impart information to our people so we can play our role and take up our responsibility as it relates to our health post 50 years.
Thank you, Godfrey. Good night.
Thank you very much. Folks, that's all the time we have this evening. We thank you for staying with us, our viewers on TV, radio, and of course, our friends on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. We thank you very, very much for staying with us. Let's continue to take responsibility for our health, do what we can, and of course, definitely, we will live longer lives. Thank you. Do have a good night and happy independence, everyone. We look forward to seeing everyone at the National Stadium tomorrow. The exposition, the march, the speeches, whatever. Let's all come out and celebrate 50 years of independence. So have a good night. All the best.